Okay, for this video hint, we're going to assume that you have read the question. Okay, let me pull up my pen. Okay, and we have a diagram that goes with this. The first thing that you need to do is set up the problem. So we are looking at time with respect to x. Notice x is miles that we're looking for. Okay, and what do we have? Right. So we can travel, or rather, the person that's going from the cabin to the island, they can run at 8 miles per hour and they swim 3 miles per hour. So we have a rate. So we need to deal with distance over the rate. Okay, so what does this mean? We're adding the whole stretch. We need to add this whole length together. All right. So this means the first distance is x over the 8. Then plus the next distance. What is the next distance? Well, we know it's going to be over 3 miles per hour. Well, we're looking at the hypotenuse of this right triangle. Okay, so we know that we have a distance of 6 minus x, and then we have 2 miles, okay, for one of the legs. So we have the square root. So under the square root, we need to square each leg of that triangle. 6 minus x squared, and 2 times 2 is 4. Okay, that is our initial setup. That's our initial equation that we need to use. And what are we going to do with that? We need to find, sorry about that, we need to actually find the first derivative of this, okay? All right, so we know that the first, well, term by term. So the first term, that derivative is going to be, well, that keeps happening. I don't want that. 1 over 8. And now we need to add, okay? We need to add this entire term, the first derivative. So this is what I'm going to do, is I'm leaving the 1/3 and I'm splitting it up, okay? But that takes care of dealing with that actual numeric value. But now we have our square root. We need to find the outside. We're using the chain rule, so we're going to go outside in. Okay, and I can tell you right now that that square root actually can be written as, here, you know what? Let's use a bar. 6 minus x, and that squared, plus the 4, and then we have a bracket. Well, that's actually to the half, okay? When we take that first derivative, that means it's going to come down. Well, we need to bring down the half, okay? Well, this is what I mean by down. So you bring down that half because it's 1/2, and then minus 1. Oh, sorry about that. If I could write. Actually, I don't. There we go. Okay. So actually subtracting 1. Okay, this is just scratch work. But when we do that, that means this will be negative 1/2. So here, that being said, we bring down that entire term. So this is 6 minus the x squared plus the 4. Okay, now that just takes care of the outside. So we've taken the square root. We've taken the first derivative of that square root, the outside. Now we have to deal with the inside. Well, it doesn't go down to the denominator if you remember your chain rule. So what are we going to do? We need to multiply what the first derivative of the inside part here. Let me this part, okay? Well, 4 becomes 0. That leaves us with taking that first term. So take that first derivative, 6 minus x. But now we still have the inside of that. Well, 6 would be 0, and then we have -1. Okay, the first derivative would be -1. And now we've gone all the way from the outside to the inside. Okay, now let's clean this. Let's rewrite this, okay? Sorry about that. Bring that back where I want it. Okay, so let's rewrite the entire thing over here. Okay, so we have the first derivative, so that's our t prime of x, and then we have 1/8 plus, well, 1 times 1 is 1. Oh, before we even do that, you know what we need to do? I see some canceling that needs to happen. Okay, well, what we need to deal with, we don't need 1 times 1, it's the -1. If you look at it, we end up with -1 on the outside. Do not distribute that in. Leave it, and you'll see why in a moment. Okay, leave it as is. Okay, now our denominator is the 3 times that 6 minus the x, square the whole thing, plus the 4. Okay? All right. So what our next step would be, well, we're going to set the whole thing to 0. Because you remember, that's how a lot of times how we solve things. The first derivative is set to 0, then we proceed. Okay, so let's take this 1/8 and bring it to the other side. Well, when we do that, what are we really going to have? Or however you can say we're bringing one of the terms to the other side. So that gives us this. I can do better than that. Then we will have 1 over the 8, 1/8, equal to. Well, then when we do that, this becomes positive. Okay? So then we have 2 positive terms on both sides. All right? Okay? So then we have the 3 and the 6 minus the x squared plus the 4. Now what do we do? Well, if you see this, we want to get rid of this square root. The only way to do that is to square both sides. And I've tried this problem a couple of ways, and this is probably the best way and the fastest way to deal with this. So this gives us 1 over 64, and that would equal, okay, well, that gives us 6 minus the x. 6 minus the x squared. I don't know if that was any better. But then we have, that's the numerator. Let's go to this denominator. Well, 3 times 3 is 9. But that brings this whole term comes out underneath that square root. Okay? Actually, a bracket would be better here. That gives us 6 minus the x, and we square that, then plus the 4. It brings that whole thing out, and it can be multiplied in. Okay? So let's see what we can do now. All right, we can bring this to the other side. Or, tell you what, let's do this. Let's factor that. Okay, multiply, we can multiply in that 9. 9 times 6x squared, and then plus the 36. We can do that. Now let's look at this. We can multiply both sides by this denominating term here, and then we can multiply both sides by this 64. Clean it up. Let's clean this up. So this will give us 9 times 6 minus, okay, okay, there it is, minus x squared plus the 36. Okay, then that will equal 64 times 6 minus x all squared. Okay, now we've got to look at this and say, okay, what is this going to do for us? What this does for us is we see that we can simplify a little further and get all the like terms on one side. So we have 36. This equals 64, 6 minus the x, the 2 now minus the 9, 6 minus x, square that. Okay, that's going to give us more than what you think. So what I see here is we can distribute some things out. Rather, they were distributed in, now let's factor out. Okay, let's factor this out. Okay, we have the 6 minus the x and squaring that. And that was all times 64 minus 9. Okay? So that all comes out. And what does that become? Well, I see 36 equals 55 times our 6 minus x squared. Okay? And that's not bad because now we've got a 36 over 55 equaling the 6 minus x squared. Okay, now from here, if you finish this, okay, this is supposed to be a video hint and it's a very long hint. So if you finish this by taking the square root of both sides, you will get somewhere, and I bet you get the value you're looking for. Okay, now you can go back to your quiz, our video quiz, and happy testing.